Before we start, I'd like to give you a little background on this. I made these poles for 20 years. They were and are the finest flagpoles in North America. And I closed my shop and retired December of last year. And I knew I was going to miss this, and I've always worked for veterans and for our country, and I'm a Vietnam War veteran, Marine Corps. And I knew I'd want to keep doing something, so I established the American Heroes Flagpoles Foundation. In the first year, it is funded 100% by my 450 plus clients who purchased my flagpoles when they were for sale, Philip included. Very generous donations, many $5,000 and more per individual, some hitting 5 figures by a long shot. We were fully funded for 2 years in less than 3 months, budget of $100,000 a year. The project's going to continue for 5 years. We're doing 100 of these flagpoles for 100 deserving veterans. The criteria is combat wounded, combat disabled, or combat decorated. It's not for any veteran, it's for the very special ones. As the foundation grows, we'll have more applications, and we have a selection committee to select if we have more applications in a given season than flagpoles. We picked Dan. Philip and I agreed. We were talking about the foundation. We agreed he'd be a very deserving recipient, and I'd met him once, and of course Philip was a not only employer but a lifelong friend of his. And unfortunately, between the time we started the process and made his flagpole, we lost Dan. At that point, we didn't have enough experience with the posthumous category, so I met with some of our directors, explained the situation, talked to Philip, and they all pointed towards talking to the widow and seeing what her feelings were. I asked Jean if she'd like this flagpole to honor Dan as a lasting tribute, and it was definitely yes. So that's why we're here. And for you, Jean, just a side note, I was talking to somebody about my dad, I don't know, 15 years ago. He passed about 22 years ago. He landed on Utah Beach in Normandy. He was my hero all my life, besides being a great dad. And I told this friend that knew me very well, one of the greatest regrets I had in my life was that my dad never got to see a single flagpole, even the first one I made. And he said to me, he says, "Don't worry, man, he's seen them all." So, and that's for you, Gene. I hope you feel he's here today, okay? All right. Gene, Mike, just raise on this halyard, nice and slow, as soon as the bugle call starts. Keep going. Both hands on that one. There you go. Thank you. If you stay right here, I'll be right with you. Mike. stay right here, please. Today, as we view this flagpole honoring Dan Burks' service to our nation, we would do well to reflect on the words of President Woodrow Wilson, dated June 4th, 1917. This flag, which we honor and under which we serve, is the emblem of our unity, our power, our thought, and purpose as a nation. It has no other character than that which we give it from generation to generation. The choices are ours. It floats in majestic silence above the host that execute those choices, whether in peace or in war. And yet, though silent, it speaks to us of the past, of the men and women who went before us, and of the records they wrote upon it. From this day on, Gene, this is your flagpole and a lasting tribute to Dan's service. What this flag speaks to you of is your choice and for you to determine. It should speak to you of Dan's valor and courage in his service in the Vietnam War as an officer and Army Ranger. It should speak to you of the devotion and comradeship he shared with those he served with, so many of which never came home. It should speak to you of the Bronze Star Medal he received for his valor, and of his great humility in never even mentioning that to you. It should speak to you of his losses, of his victories, and mostly of Dan doing everything one can do in the service of our nation, and then even more. It should speak to you of his love for those who fought alongside him and gave so much, many giving all. It should speak to you of the 58,318 names on the wall in Washington, D.C., so many of them Dan's brothers in arms. It honors them, as our nation sadly failed to do, for a generation of America's finest that displayed so much valor and gallantry and made such sacrifices. And there is a final thing, possibly the most significant, that this flagpole flying our great colors can do, which I deeply hope it will. This symbol of Dan's service and sacrifice can become a constant reminder that a grateful nation, which took so long to honor your husband, finally did. God bless you in heaven, sir. Thank you for your service in combat, fighting for the United States of America. On behalf of the American Heroes Flagpoles Foundation, it is a pleasure and a privilege to present this flagpole to you. And it is a very great honor to express what was so important and yet what was forgotten for so long a time for Dan. These two simple words: thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
All right. If you'd like to speak now, please do.
I wish Dan were here in person to accept this honor, but I will attempt to say a few words in his place. Dan Burks, a.k.a. Robin Trail, which was his military call sign and later his online username, was never one to seek public attention. He would be both surprised and yet so pleased to accept this flagpole in recognition of his service. Most important to him today would be the fact that so many of you, his close friends and colleagues, traveled here to this remote and peaceful spot to share this moment with him. We would like to welcome you all. First of all, Danny, for establishing the American Heroes Flagpole Foundation to recognize combat warriors. Thank you. Philip Drumheller, president and owner of Lane Press, who sponsored Dan to receive this honor and who made this possible. Jane Finn and the Gateleys from Heinsberg, with whom Dan shared road warrior, commuting wisdom, and memorable Christmas celebrations over the years. His political strategist, ex-Marine Will Edwards of Shelburne, Vietnam veteran Willow Turnbull and his wife Kim are knowledgeable and trusted North Country neighbors down the hill. And those who are not able to be with us today. In particular, our son Charlie, who is in Asheville, North Carolina with his wife, and new son Cameron Daniel Burks, who was born Thursday. Speaking for myself, after 50 years of marriage, I can say that Dan's military experience in OCS and as an Army Ranger, Special Forces Green Beret in Vietnam, shaped his values throughout his life. He practiced leadership and listening skills in all of his many professional assignments in the printing industry. He promoted teamwork and in challenging workplace situations while encouraging employees to expand their capabilities. However, if asked what his greatest lifetime achievement was, Dan would have said, mentoring others. Whether on the shop floor or at home, listening to our son and his friends, he felt comfortable as adolescents and later as adults asking him for advice. In 1968, he learned to construct revetments at his SF camp in Bateau, and many years later used these same skills to plan and build this mountain retreat with the help of our son Charlie, now a contractor, who views his father as his best friend. Although Dan's ashes will be inurned in Arlington National Cemetery at some point in the future, it means so much to Charlie and me to have this flagpole here in Dan's favorite place. It will always be a physical reminder to those of us who are left behind. To quote Dan's favorite advice, keep on marching.
I'm glad that the gods above decided to fly the flag. I was a little worried for a minute. My name is, as Jean said, is Philip Drumheller, and I'd like to begin by extending my condolences to Jean and Charlie and family on your loss. I had the distinct honor of working with Dan for a number of years in the printing industry at a plant across the lake. Honestly, Dan could be intimidating. On mission, his demeanor was often stern, but he had a way of breaking into a smile or a grin at just the right time. A seeming paradox, Dan could be a hard ass, but he was a thoughtful, caring leader who knew that respect had to be earned, and he earned it. He knew that satisfaction comes from a job well done, and he never did anything marginally. And he knew that planting the kernel of a good idea in others permitted them to take the ball and run with it. Dan Burks thrived on watching his people succeed. Since his passing, people at work who knew Dan, of course, have been saddened. But I've been especially struck by the way they have been quick to share the importance Dan was, not only to their career, but to their lives. He created pathways. He helped businesses succeed. He built people. I know. I'm one of many whose life was touched by Dan, and am grateful for it. 15 or 20 years ago, I had the good fortune of meeting Danny Kafitz, and together we installed one of his magnificent flagpoles at my home in Shelburne. Little did I expect that the chance encounter would turn into a lifelong friendship, and an important friendship. Danny Kafitz, Dan Burks, and many of you are combat veterans to whom we owe an enormous debt of gratitude. You may know that for years, Danny dedicated a flagpole annually to a deserving wounded warrior. Small solace for the sacrifices of many, but important recognition otherwise often and tragically missing. Danny approached me a decade or so ago asking for help. The deserving awardee of a flagpole lived in Oregon, and the cost of transportation to the recipient's home, on top of the cost of building the flagpole, was just too much. Dan Burks, struck by Danny's mission and dedication, jumped right in and arranged for the pole to be shipped complimentary to Oregon on one of our vendors' trucks. That was a moment when Dan's sternness was not to be forgotten. And it was oh so apparent. There was no saying no to Dan Burks. Which brings us full circle to today. While Danny's mission has changed in the past year or two, he's still focused on veterans and flagpoles, our heroes and our country. I've no doubt that Dan Burks would be bursting with pride were he here today, and that this pole will stand not only as a symbol of this great country, but a tribute to Dan and all veterans. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Danny. And thank you, veterans.
And we'll play taps by the Marine Corps' own Band and Bugle Corps to honor Dan and his service. You good?